It was a crisp March night, 1768. A Kiskapo band, led by Puck Sinwa, with his life mate Lipsky in tow, were on their way to Old Chillicothe, or Chillicothe, for a Shawnee tribal council meeting to decide whether or not the Shawnee would go to war with the Long Knives, aka the British colonialists. When all of a sudden Lipsky goes into labor, they quickly construct a birthing hut. On their way to taking her into the birthing hut, all of a sudden, a shooting star shoots across the sky. Everybody stops and goes silent because they know this is a special birth of a special child. She gave birth to a baby boy, and they named him Tecumseh, aka the Panther in the Sky. And he went on to become the greatest Shawnee, if not Native American, warrior chief ever. It was here that Tecumseh and his family were traveling to. Here on this site was Chillicothe, or Old Chillicothe. They were traveling here to have a Shawnee council meeting to decide whether or not they would go to war with the British colonialists. They decided against war at that time, and they would move away from their homelands to separate themselves from these colonialists and give them their space. At 3 days old, this was the only time that Tecumseh knew this site as Chillicothe, as it was burned down multiple times by pioneers over the years and moved eastward and eastward until it was dedicated as the first Ohio city that we know today as Chillicothe. Although they decided against war at that time and to move farther and farther away, war would eventually find the Shawnee Indians, whether they wanted it or not. Unfortunately for young Tecumseh, he was born into a world of turmoil and war. After being forced from their homes multiple times, the Shawnee once again met up as a tribe and decided they had had enough, and they would finally fight back against the Americans. Chief Cornstalk, senior war chief of the Shawnee, ordered the red tomahawk be passed from village to village. And in this, Tecumseh probably saw the preparations for war. He saw the war dance danced by warriors painted head to toe. He saw the preparations they took with the purification ceremonies they went through that would give them more energy and allow them to become one with the Great Spirits. Tecumseh was definitely there when his father and brother left for battle, painted head to toe with feathers on their heads. But little did Tecumseh know, as his father and brother headed down the warrior's path, this would be the last time he would see his father alive. It was October 10th, 1774, when the Shawnee attacked Colonel Andrew Lewis's troops, where the Kanawha River and the Ohio River met at Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Lewis had over 1,000 men, and the Shawnee only had 300 to 500, but they fought hard and they fought strong. The battle raged all day, and Lewis lost over 140 men, but unfortunately for the Shawnee, they fought them to a standstill. Chief Cornstalk decided to withdraw his warriors, knowing full well that the path to the Scioto River, where the Shawnee lived, was now wide open to his enemy.
The Battle of Point Pleasant really had to do with continued westward expansion into the Ohio country. And one of the most important things, the Indians are defeated at Point Pleasant, but the thing that's for our story that's most important is that Tecumseh's father was killed at the Battle of Point Pleasant. So he has actually a personal story in this. He's got a personal stake. It's not just sort of an ideological or his ties to the tribe, but there is a personal element to this too.
He would have been right around 6 years old at the Battle of Point Pleasant when his father was killed. His adopted father was wounded and killed, Blackfish. So he grew up in that type of a situation where there was nearly constant warfare of some sort going on.
And with that, Tecumseh's destiny was set, and his hatred for white men would live forever. And he would live out and fulfill his father's wishes until his final breath. The colonies were at the brink of war with Great Britain for claim of the land, and the Shawnee eventually found themselves right in the middle of it. Stephen Ruddle, a young boy who was taken by the Shawnee and then raised, and who was Tecumseh's best friend and interpreter later on in life, said, quote, "Tecumseh knew hunger, fear, and grief. 5 times as a child, invaders penetrated his tribe's territories, burning and killing. Time and time again, Tecumseh and family had to flee for their lives, their homes in flames behind them." Without his father, Tecumseh had to rely on his older brother and sister, Cheeseekau and Tecumseh.
The whole family was adopted by a village chief named Blackfish. He spent a lot of his childhood in what we call Old Chalagatha. Chalagatha is another sept name that's been changed over time to Chillicothe. But this one was on the banks of the Little Miami River just north of Xenia. And so he grows up with this adopted father, but his older brother Chicksika and his older sister Tecumseh, they did a lot in the raising of him, and both of them had huge impact on who he would become as he grew up.
This is the Paint Creek, Tecumseh's favorite hunting ground. As a child, as a teenager, and even as an adult in his late 30s and 40s, he would come here to hunt, to fish, to just be in nature, to be one with the land and the Great Spirit. It was here, on this creek, where Tecumseh's brother, Cheeseekau, taught him to hunt, taught him to fish, taught him to be a man, now that his father had died in the Battle of Point Pleasant.
The Revolutionary War ends with the Treaty of Paris. Now the British promised to look out for Shawnee land interests, but don't, and transfer control to almost all lands east of the Mississippi and south of the Great Lakes to America.
Well, not just the natives that sided with the British, but the ones who sided with the Americans or the ones who wanted to be neutral. They all felt betrayed by the end of the war. I've always felt it was a carrot that the British dangled just in the war. But when they went into the treaty talks for what became the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the British said, hey, you end this, and all that land that we have claimed between the Appalachians and the Mississippi, you guys can just have that. Okay, so end this war, get this done, and you get all of that territory.
We have, after this, in 1784, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Fort Stanwix is important because it's really a replica of a treaty that the British had done. And what it does is open up the Kentucky country to expansion. And the problem with this, of course, is that Kentucky is right across the river. And also Kentucky had been hunting grounds for the Shawnee. And so conflict between the native people and the Shawnee and the Americans really begins to expand from there.
The Shawnee and other tribes were upset and decided to band together for the first attempt at a pan-tribal confederacy called the Western Confederacy. And they raided up and down their former homelands for 9 years.
The Indians, the native people, what they do is they form a confederation called the Western Confederation. And the goal of the Western Confederation is to try to hold off these expansions. And Tecumseh is part of that, but he's a very minor figure in the beginning in these years. And I think the real problem that they run into is the Indians aren't united. They're not politically united. And so what happens is the Americans will make a deal with a handful of Indians, and the Indians will give away their land for a pittance. And then the Americans will say, well, we've made a deal fair and square. And of course, Tecumseh is outraged by these things. It's one of the things he criticizes the Americans most of the time for. One of the great victories the Indians have during this period is what's called the Battle of St. Clair's Defeat, where an American force is sent to drive the Indians back. About 900 soldiers were killed, which if you compare that to the Battle of Little Bighorn, it's far bigger than the Battle of Little Bighorn. So at least for a while in 1791, things are going the Indians' way.
In 1792, George Washington, who was president, had had enough, and he brought Major General Anthony Wayne, a Revolutionary War hero, out of retirement and ordered him to put together troops to squash and crush any resistance to white settlement in the area.
Well, in part, he knew Mad Anthony Wayne as a really hard, tough, hard-driving soldier, and he knew that he would really be able to bring the fight to the native peoples.
Wayne was a very effective leader. For as much as he is disliked amongst natives, you have to admit, the guy knew what he was doing.
Wayne knew where others had failed was in their training and preparation, so he trained his troops for 2 years. In 1794, Wayne gets his marching orders, head north. So he heads north, setting up a line of forts as he goes, all the way from Fort Washington in Cincinnati to 60 miles away from the Maumee River at Fort Recovery.
When he finds where they are, he forms up, gets ready, looks like he's going to attack, and he knew his enemy. He knew that warriors tend to fast the day before. So he gets all set up, knowing they're going to fast, and the next day he doesn't attack. Okay, and then again he forms up, looks like he's going to attack the next day, doesn't attack. So he gets these warriors weakened until finally they're saying, oh, okay, you know what? I got to go back and get something to eat. This is waiting too long. And then he attacked.
On August 20th, Wayne went in for the kill and caught the warriors off guard. There was probably only 500 warriors defending fallen timbers. They were outnumbered 6-1. And Tecumseh was right there on the front lines, ready to attack.
When the first guard advanced, Tecumseh and his men rose and fired, killing 6 men, sending the rest running, with warriors hot on their tails.
Wayne's troops were well trained though and composed themselves and fought back hard. They outnumbered the warriors and eventually wore them down after counterattack after counterattack, and eventually the Indians' defenses were open.
But as you said, Wayne had trained his regulars for 2 years, but he sends out militia first, knows that he'll be able to get the natives out in the open, then sends in his regulars. And at that battle, the tribes were simply outgunned, outpositioned, outgeneraled. Tecumseh was on the front lines. An interesting story because you need to show that people are human. It's said that in that battle he did what was called dry balled his rifle. He, in the heat of battle, he forgot to put the powder down his muzzleloader first, just shoved a lead bullet, and couldn't fire it. So he had to get another weapon that he scrounged from the battlefield. So even by that time, when he was a pretty experienced warrior, stuff happens when you're getting shot at.
He was driven back into another line of warriors, and he eventually had to accept defeat and retreated back downriver with the rest of the troops. And with that, the Battle of Fallen Timbers was over.
It's interesting and always has been to me that when a single Indian defeat takes place, the natives lose, the Americans are immediately saying, hey, let's sit down and have a treaty, and you're going to give up this and this and this. But when there's a major American defeat, like St. Clair's defeat, Harmar's defeat, Custer much later, it's not, oh, we're going to sit down and cease hostilities. It was, well, that's just one battle.
The Indians are defeated. They end up having to sign the Treaty of Greenville. And the Treaty of Greenville gives almost all of Ohio except for the northwest corner, to the Americans. And so they cede a huge amount of territory after the Treaty of Greenville.
For 50 years, the Shawnee had suffered and defended this ground from French, British, and Americans. Many had died in the struggle, including Tecumseh's father and brother, and now it was over. He must have been glad his father and brother were not alive to see the result of their sacrifices. Tecumseh was now a minor chieftain, and he couldn't undo the treaty, but in his mind, he remembers the great Confederacy he once fought for. He would wait and bide his time, and when America became land hungry again, he would work for its resurrection. He wouldn't have to wait long. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1800, Tecumseh's opportunity would arise. In 1802, a man who had fought in the Battle of Fallen Timbers had become governor of the newly formed Indiana Territory, and he was seizing up land at his whim. This would be Tecumseh's greatest adversary. This man is William Henry Harrison. President Thomas Jefferson is looking to strengthen the Northwest and break the Indian way of life. Jefferson said, quote, "Make them accept white life, and they will become farmers, and they will sell their land for tools." President Jefferson finds an advocate in William Henry Harrison. Harrison is 27 and a mild-mannered and cultivated Virginian. He is strong-willed and ambitious, and a professional politician who is close with land speculators.
He was a professional politician. He had his own aims, and he was willing to do whatever he needed to accomplish those. I wouldn't go so far as to call him corrupt, but he had ties to land speculators. He married the daughter of John Cleave Sims. He was a very shrewd man. He read situations well. Even natives talk about how calm he was under fire, under pressure, that he always stayed in control of himself. But he was also arrogant. He was willing to do whatever he thought he needed to do to accomplish those goals, and just thought, essentially asked forgiveness and not permission.
As soon as William Henry Harrison becomes governor of Indiana, he is land hungry and manipulatively makes deals for less than 2 cents per acre. He knew unlocking land and encouraging white settlements would give security to the citizens of Indiana and would bring statehood faster. In 1802, as a fever runs rampant through the native villages, they are desperate for a hero. But Tecumseh is helpless against the contagion. However, his younger brother, Lalawetheka, aka the Rattle, steps up. He is slim, average height, and has a closed right eye from a hunting accident as a child. He even describes himself as a very wicked man.
He's an interesting man. He was one of triplets, which is very unusual amongst the Shawnee. So triplets was nearly unheard of. He was in a family of warriors and these men who were very athletic and coordinated. He was always unathletic, uncoordinated. So he tried to be this holy man and this healer. He wasn't taken real seriously until he had a major vision.
In 1805, he has a prophecy dream.
He just dropped down at his family fire, dropped into this trance that was so intense that his wife was beginning to make funeral arrangements. She thought he was gone. And when he woke up from the trance, he said that Kichimanatu had showed him what would happen if people did not change their ways, go back to the old ways, and that he would then be called Tenskwatawa. He opens the door, or as most Americans refer to him, as the prophet.
Now many listen and welcome him, but not everyone does. The Shawnee Council viewed him as a, quote, pretentious and insignificant Westerner. Now at odds with the council, he goes to his brother Tecumseh, and they decide to establish a new village, Prophetstown.
One thing is they decide to move their center westward, And so they go into western Indiana to the kind of the headwaters of the Wabash River, and they set up a new town. They call it Prophetstown, and it's at this point where the prophet has his great vision about the eclipse. So people begin to gather all around him at Prophetstown. Tecumseh is kind of in the shadow of his brother at this point. But he still has this vision that we've talked about, this idea that the Indian people can be just one people. What also happens is that during this period is that William Henry Harrison comes into the picture. And he is sent both as a general and as a diplomat to try to deal with the Shawnee and their allies.
A lot of the early interactions between Prophetstown and Harrison down in Vincennes was, if you will just change the way you're doing things, we can coexist. We've already been pushed this far, but we're getting people from the other tribes that are joining us, and we're not being treated fairly.
Now Harrison continues to make treaties, including the Treaty of Fort Wayne. Now Tecumseh and others had had enough. Tecumseh said, quote, "Now it is time we stand together to save our lands, culture, and independence. We must revive the Great Confederacy."
So with the Fort Wayne Treaty of 1809, Harrison brought in people that were not associated with the lands in dispute at all, even close to it. It was along the Wabash River in Indiana. He was bringing in people from Michigan, and then the tribes, the Miamis, Weas, Eel Rivers, that had been promised the right to dispose of those lands in the last treaty Harrison had negotiated. Very few of them were invited, and then a lot of the tribes that actually were living on or using the land, like the Shawnee and the Kickapoo, were not invited at all. So a lot of what the prophet and Tecumseh were saying was, just get rid of that treaty, forget about that one. Let's call a mulligan and start over with it.
Now William Henry Harrison during this time sends a letter to the prophet and tells him that they need to meet and that the damage has not been done so much that it cannot be undone. But Tecumseh meets with him instead, saying, quote, "I am alone the acknowledged head of all the Indians."
It was a bit tense from the beginning. It was on the lands of Grouse Land, which was Harrison's residence in Vincennes, and Harrison had everything planned out. He was very much into pomp and circumstance. Harrison's got this big stage set up for all the delegates to meet on, and Tecumseh and his warriors who escort him to this just says, "Nope, Mother Earth is good enough for us," and has a seat. And all around it was like, ooh. So they give their speeches back and forth. Harrison regards Tecumseh as rather insolent and arrogant. The Treaty of Fort Wayne should not have happened. The way it was done was bad. We need to fix these things. Then Harrison responds and basically says everything that Tecumseh said is wrong. And Harrison upset Tecumseh so much that Tecumseh hopped up, and of course he hops up, his warriors hop up. Harrison basically says, "This is over, I'm not talking to you unless it's through somebody else. Get out of here." Everybody calms down, and Tecumseh sends an apology, says, I got upset, I'm sorry about that. That was out of character, I shouldn't have done it. And they're able to meet the next day. But it still comes out that they just can't get along. They met for several days. Neither one can get the other to change things. And due to some other issues that were going on, some raids happening elsewhere that Tecumseh and the prophet just couldn't control, it got closer and closer to actual warfare.
We really just have sketchy information about what was exactly said at these meetings. But it became very clear that Tecumseh made clear that the Indians intended to hold the land, and if the Americans were going to take it away from them, they were going to have to fight to take it away from them. And so that, I think, is an important part of this. During those negotiations, Tecumseh begins to realize that he really has to have a broader coalition if he's going to be able to defeat the American army that is assembling at Vincennes.
Harrison and Tecumseh meet one last time, and Tecumseh unfortunately lets it slip that he's going to be heading south, and Harrison takes this opportunity to strike.
He goes on one of his longest journeys. He had done this more than once across the southern United States, talking to different Indian tribes and trying to gather them together and get their support to have a united front against the expanding United States. And unfortunately, while he's gone, William Henry Harrison decides to take advantage of the opportunity, and he mounts an attack on Prophetstown.
Prophet tells his warriors that they have the spirits on their sides, that the Americans would be stupefied and their gunpowder would turn to dust, and they themselves would be invisible. And with that, Prophet sends his warriors off to battle.
They go out and are able to get in position surrounding this camp at around 4:30 in the morning. I've seen a sentry saw something and fired the first shot. So they didn't have complete surprise, but it was pretty thorough.
Now the Shawnee emerged, painted faces, tomahawks raised, and they attacked William Henry Harrison's line so much to the point that it's butchered, and Harrison himself has to come and fight on the front lines. But ultimately, the surprise attack fails.
And the end result of the Battle of Tippecanoe, it's called, is the Indians were defeated. And the Prophetstown was scattered.
They had half the numbers, technologically superior opposing force on their chosen ground because they'd chosen where to camp, and they still inflicted about twice the casualties that they themselves suffered. But they did finally have to withdraw back to the village site, but they had rattled Harrison's men so much that they didn't go out again for another day or two to actually check out the village. And by that time, they'd been able to do a retreat and take what they could with them. But they did destroy the granaries that were obvious. I believe it was the Kickapoo had hidden theirs pretty well. So they still had supplies to last through the winter. But the Shawnee and the others that had been in the village, although they come back and rebuild, they had a really tough winter then because the food stores were gone.
This is Prophet's Rock, where the prophet sat and watched the battle at Tippecanoe take place. He shouted encouragement and prayers for his warriors. Unfortunately, his prayers and encouragement were not enough, as they were defeated, and the prophet was disgraced soon after, because his prophecy of them being invisible and bulletproof did not come true. So now, with the Pan-Tribal Confederacy in shatters, it was up to Tecumseh to pick up the pieces, put them back together, and have one last attempt at his ultimate goal of a Pan-Tribal Confederacy and to drive the white man out of Indian land once and for all.
But in order to do that, he would have to rely on a shaky allegiance with the British in order to bring that ultimate goal to a reality.